Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Today we're going to talk about the political system which is envisaged by religion, by Islam, and the fact of the matter is that after the dismemberment of the caliphate in 1924 by Mustafa Kemal, Muslim political scientists have been endeavoring to come up with a political system which is envisaged by the Quran. And because of the fact that ever since the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ passed away 14 centuries ago, the system of caliphate was in place for so many centuries. And it was only in the last century, almost 100 years ago, when this dismemberment of the caliphate actually resulted in the fact that a lot of independent Muslim countries had come into being, and the search for an Islamic political system as a result began at that time. And we see a lot of scholars talking about the system which Islam posits before its followers. But in this regard, some of the important points that we have to first understand before we move ahead and find that system which is envisaged by Islam. The first and basic point in this regard is that as far as the system envisaged by religion is concerned, it is not that the Quran has given us a complete system, or it has given us a complete set of rules which actually signify that system. On the other hand, what it has given us are certain principles, statutes, which we can call the political Sharia. And those statutes are very, very brief, and they present the framework within which a system can be developed. So as far as the terminology of a system is concerned, we have to understand that Islam does not give a system in most aspects, in particular the political aspect. All that it gives us are certain rules, certain principles, certain guidelines. The system has to be created and it has to be built upon those guidelines. And this system could be different in different countries. It could be different in different societies. It could have a different impact as far as the actual details are concerned. But all of these systems, wherever they are developed, in whichever period of time they are developed, they'll be governed by the same set of principles. So what we can say is that first of all, we have to understand that extracting a system of a political thought from the Quran is an endeavor which can never succeed, because we have seen from the Quran that it gives no political system. And had there been such a system, it wouldn't have taken 100 years, and still research is going on to pick out what exactly an Islamic system of politics stands for. So this is a very basic premise that we have to understand, that as far as systemization is concerned, as far as the details are concerned, they have been left to the discretion of the human intellect and people living in a country. As far as the guidelines are concerned, they are eternal. They have to be adhered to, and they are of primary importance. So these are the cardinal principles which Islam talks about regarding politics. But as I have just said, that as far as the system is concerned, then Muslims have been advised to create a system on the basis of these guidelines. If this first point is clear, if this first point has gotten across, then the next thing that we have to come to grips with is the fact that what exactly is that are those political guidelines which the Quran provides us. But before we even go into those guidelines, we have four different systems which have been developed, and as a result, we do feel that these systems, because each of them, it is said that they represent the Islamic political system in some form or the other, and based on some guidelines, then we need to examine that what exactly does Islam and religion stands for, because we have four different Islamic systems of politics, of political science, and each of them claim to be representative of what Islam says. So first of all, we have the dynastic system, or the monarchy, or the caliphate, as we can say. So for 14 centuries, we find that once the Prophet passed away, from that time until right up to 1924, when the caliphate had been dismembered, the system of politics which was in place was that there was a dynasty which was installed. So we started off with the Umayyads, but then we had the Abbasids, and of course they had spread in various areas. And finally we had the Ottomans, and of course Amongst these three mainstream, we had the Idrisids also, we had the Fatimids, so they had different territories and they were occupying different lands, but all of them were based on monarchies or kingdoms. So basically, the ruler was a king, and he would have the carte blanche, as we can say, or the final say in all matters. He would take advice from different courtiers, from his viziers, from his confidants, but he would be the final person. And that is how the system worked. And he would invariably, before passing away, nominate a person who would succeed him. So that person could be his son from his progeny, even grandson at times, maybe a brother, maybe a nephew. So it would basically be a bloodline which was followed within that dynasty. And this makes a very strong case, actually, that it does feel that perhaps this is what Islam stands for, that we have to appoint a king, we have to pick up a king, and he is the person who's going to rule us. And once his kingdom is established, then this continuity would be provided to in that kingdom through his progeny, or as I said, through his nephews or other people who belong to his bloodline. And the strongest case, as you can well imagine, is for this dynastic system, because this has been in place for 14 centuries, and you can see that ever since Amir Muawiyah ascended the throne, and he was made the caliph, and once he nominated his son Yazid bin Muawiyah to hold office after him, this system actually continued in line, and we find the Umayyads ruling for almost 100 years, and then the Abbasids, they ruled for a fair number of years, and they spread in various territories, including Spain, and then, as I said, other dynasties also crept up, like the Idrisids, the Fatimids, the Buyids, and all of them, they ruled different areas, and ultimately the Ottoman Turks, they ruled for almost 500 years before the last Sultan was actually deposed, and Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, he actually annulled this system of caliphate. So if this is what Islam stands for, and if this is what Islam is, the Islamic model of politics is, then perhaps it has the greatest, I would say, substantiation, because history is in favor of this, and it does seem that in these 14 centuries, this system has prevailed ever since. The second system, which we find also being advocated as the Islamic political system, is a theocracy or a theocratic state. And there are two very major states which are governed by a theocracy. So one of them is Iran, and the other one is Afghanistan. So Iran and Afghanistan, or the Iran model and the Afghanistan model, they speak of a theocratic state, which means that scholars of this ummah, scholars of that country, have the reins of the political sphere in their hands. So the argument that they make is very simple. They say that Islam is an ideology, and that ideology is best understood by its custodians, and they are the scholars. So how can a person who is not a scholar, who does not subscribe, deeply understand this ideology, can be made someone who governs an Islamic state? So according to them, the simple reasoning in favor of a theocracy is that basically Islam being an ideology which is understood by scholars, and who are the best custodians and advocates of religion, so it is but natural that the reins of political power must rest in their hands. So in Iran, we see this model flourishing, and we see Afghanistan also in these days, they uphold theocracy, in which they think that only people who have deep religious knowledge, they are well equipped to govern an Islamic state, and that is the end of that. And they don't give anyone else the authority. They don't give anyone else. They don't regard anyone else to be eligible to have a say in political affairs. Yes, people can be consulted. People can be their opinions can be elicited, but then it will never be the fact that people who are non-religious, so to speak, or who are not scholars or who are non-scholars, can be given the reins of the political system of that country. The third model that we have seen in recent times is secularism. And in Turkey, for example, when Mustafa Kemal annulled the caliphate, it was secularism that he imposed, which means that state will have no religion. As far as the system of state is concerned, it shall not be governed by any religious directive. Religion is a matter which belongs to a person. It's a personal affair between a person and his God. And so therefore, yes, people should be encouraged to be religious by following the directives. But as far as the rules of business of state is concerned, they should not be governed by any religious ideology. So secularism is a model that has been upheld in Turkey. In the last century, yes, we have seen a lot of changes coming along in Turkey, but then Muslim scholars, or one group of Muslim scholars, also advocate secularism, which means that state should have no religion. And as far as the affairs of state are concerned, they have nothing to do with religion at all, and they should be governed by human intellect. And as far as religion is concerned, it is a private matter between a man or a person and his God. And there are people also who make this case for the country of Pakistan, and they cite the 11th August speech of the Qaid in this regard, which he made to the Constituent Assembly in 1947, and which is interpreted by certain quarters to mean that the Qaid also intended Pakistan to be a secular state, and it was later molded into a religious state. And after the objectives resolution, the new theme which emerged was, yes, that Islam is like the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. But then this was never the case in the times of the Qaid, because his 11th August speech is construed to mean that he wanted people, every person to have his own say, and he said that religion has nothing to do with the rules of business, and so therefore each person, whether he's a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian, he's free to go to his mosque or to his temples. So this is a speech which people think that he stood for secularism and wanted Pakistan to be a secular state. The fourth model, which we also find in our contemporary Muslim world, we have 55 Muslim countries or 56 Muslim countries at the moment, and as I said, there are different models. So dictatorship or monarchy or kingship is one model which we can see still prevailing in some of our Muslim countries, in which and it's a dynastic rule which has continued even after the dismemberment of the caliphate. We have seen theocracy, as I just said, that Iran and Afghanistan are two very prominent examples. Even you can cite Saudi Arabia in this regard, because as far as the Saudi government is concerned, so there is a pact between the Al Sheikh and the rulers that as far as the rulers are concerned, they shall always come from the House of Saud, and the scholars, and they will rule in consultation with the Al Sheikh or the scholars, and this is how there would be a pact between the two, and the state would run with like conglomeration. So it's not a very pure theocracy, but sort of governed by the rule of the Sheikh as well. And as I said, the fourth model that you see in some of the countries like Malaysia and Indonesia is democracy, which means that the rule of the majority shall prevail. And as far as the elected representatives are concerned, they shall be elected by the masses, and those masses will be responsible for creating a system in which people are elected. And whether the presidential system of democracy is adopted, which is the case with the United States, or the parliamentary system of democracy is adopted, which is the case with the UK or the United Kingdom, it is regardless of the fact that as long as rulers are elected by the masses, which is the basic philosophy of democracy. So countries like Malaysia and Indonesia and some other Muslim countries, of course Pakistan included, they think that it is democracy or the rule of the masses that should determine the system of an Islamic state. So we have these four models before us, and as I said earlier on, that Muslim thinkers, Muslim political scientists, all of them have been working at times in isolation, at times in the form of groups, and this matter has still not settled. And in various areas, you'll find different people coming up with different models. So I was actually intending to give you an overview of what Muslim thinkers today have actually come up with, and these are the four models that are generally advocated. But then, as far as the Quran is concerned, as far as the understanding is concerned regarding what is the basis of the Quranic political system, because as I said earlier on, the word system, although is used in a loose connotation, but in a very precise connotation, it is a misnomer. It is not the right term to be used for any Islamic field of study, because, as I said, all these areas, they do not give any system. So neither does Islam give you a political system, nor an economic system, nor a social system, nor a penal system. All that it gives are certain principles. And this is precisely what we mean when we say that there is an Islamic political Sharia, there is an Islamic economic Sharia, there is a penal Sharia, there is a social Sharia, which of course mean that these are political guidelines, they are principles, they are regulations. Systems have to be made around these guidelines. So systems are developed by political scientists, but the guidelines which are enshrined in the Quran, they are eternal, and the system, of course, can vary from place to place. It can also vary from one area to another area, and as long as it adheres to the same principles which the Quran picks out. But the basic Quranic principle in this regard, of course, there are other areas also that we might discuss in some other settings, but the area that I'd like to discuss today in particular or specifically is the one which the Quran discusses regarding the political guideline it gives for the formation of a government. So in Surah Shura, which is the 41st Surah of the Quran, verse 38, the Quran tells us, Amruhum Shura Bainahum. And if we translate this very, very precise sentence, this very concise sentence, it has a lot of brevity in it, you'll find out that what it says is that the system of Muslims, or their political system, or their collective system, is based on consultation. So the Quranic term, if you can call it a Quranic term, it is shura. Shura means a place in which, or a sitting or an assembly in which people sit and they give their opinion. So, and that opinion, of course, is something which the Quran says that the way that you have to govern your country, the system of government of your country, the basic guideline for that system is Amruhum Shura Bainahum, which means that it is the consultation, it is the opinion of people through which a government has to come into being. And through that system, you have to elect people, and obviously people would differ in the election of different candidates. So a very natural corollary or a consequence would be that if there is a difference of opinion regarding election, then the will of the majority will prevail. In other words, the system of shura, which the Quran envisages, is the one which is closest to, in our modern terminology, to what democracy is. The Quran does not use the word democracy; it uses the word shura. And if you just study the details of both, you'll find that they are both synonymous as far as the system of election is concerned, because in both these cases, people, they contest elections, and whichever party holds or enjoys the confidence of the majority is the party who's destined to rule, who is given the entitlement to rule, and it shall remain in rulership. It shall, as long as it enjoys the majority of the people through which it had been elected. And as I said earlier on, it is regardless of the fact whether this election or this opinion, soliciting of opinion is done through a parliamentary way or in a presidential way. So that is regardless of the fact. Both are equally representative of a democracy, or, as I said, in the case of the Quran, the Shura, because in both these cases, it is primarily people who are electing their own representatives. And of course, when they are done on the basis of various parties which field various candidates, then the party which wields the majority vote would be the one who would come to power. So this is how the Quran has actually given this directive, Amruhum Shura Bainahum, that their system should be based on consultation, which means people should be consulted. And one of the important things here is that it doesn't say at all that people who are scholars have to be consulted. It doesn't say that. I mean, as theocrats would say, it's not that theocracy or people who are religious scholars are the ones who are going to vote and elect their representative. The Quran does not qualify this by any adjective. All it says, Amruhum Shura Bainahum, which means that the system of state of Muslims is based on their consultation, whoever they are, which means all people who are adults, mature adults, whoever they are, whatever their profession is, however much they are educated or non-educated, that is immaterial. But they are the people who hold the destiny of their nation in their hands by picking up their rulers. And you can see, my dear participants and my dear viewers, that this system was followed by the rightly guided caliphate. So I purposefully did not mention the rightly guided caliphate when I was actually describing for you the various dynasties which ruled Muslims. I started off with the Umayyads, we had the Abbasids, we had the Fatimids, we had the Idrisis, we had the Buyids, we had the Ottomans. So all these were dynastic, they were dynasties who ruled the Muslims in various eras. But as far as the rightly guided caliphate was concerned, I can describe before you that as far as they are concerned, they were the people who ruled once the Prophet passed away. And once he passed away, the system that he actually envisaged was that, yes, people who hold the rule of the majority or who enjoy the conference of the majority would be ones to whom the reins of political power would be transferred. So it is precisely due to this reason that the Prophet knew that when he was passing away or before he had passed away, that he should actually point out the party itself which held the majority. Because we know very well that had the expansion in the Muslim empire not occurred after the conquest of Medina, when the whole of Arabia came under the sway of the Quraysh, the Ansar actually, who lived in Medina, they held sway, and the political reins would have been transferred to them automatically had the territory or the Muslim territory been confined to the state of Medina. But we know that after expansion, after the conquest of Mecca, there was a general reversion and conversion, and the whole of Arabia came under the sway of the Quraysh. So precisely keeping in view this Quranic directive that Amruhum Shura Bainahum, which meant that the people have to be consulted, and once this consultation takes place, the rule of the majority will prevail. The Prophet actually pointed out on the basis of this very verse that Al-A'immatu min Quraysh. He said that Al-A'immatu min Quraysh means that the rulers shall belong to the Quraysh. Now this sentence was not like a nomination of the Quraysh. It was not that he was nominating his own tribe. We know that the Prophet belonged to the Quraysh. It meant that the Quraysh are the ones who are eligible to rule because they hold the majority. And the Prophet knew that because until 8th Hijrah, until the conquest of Mecca, the Prophet would often consult the Ansar, and he would actually generally accept their view. And therefore, the two prominent leaders of the Ansar, which were the leaders of Aus and Khazraj, were Sa'd bin Mu'az and Sa'd bin Ubadah. They were the ones who would be consulted. But as I said, that the Prophet, his own eye, his own future farsightedness was so potent that he did detect the fact that there could be a difference of opinion once he passes away. Because how would people know that which party is in the majority, whether the Quraysh hold the majority rule, whether the Ansar hold the majority rule? So knowing the fact that once he would pass away, there could be a discrepancy, there could be a discussion between the two. And lo and behold, it did happen when the Prophet passed away. We know that in the Saqifa of Bani Sa'idah, and the Prophet was yet to be buried, there was a discussion there between the Muhajirun and the Ansar as to who should be the next ruler. And Sa'd bin Mu'az, who was the leader of the Khazraj, of the Aus tribe, he held that, well, we are the ones with whom the Prophet would confer, and therefore we should be given these reins. And we know that from amongst the Muhajirun, Abu Bakr, he reminded Sa'd bin Mu'az and he said, well, Sa'd, don't you remember that the Prophet himself, when he was alive, he had said, Al-A'immatu min Quraysh, and he said that the rulers should be from the Quraysh, not because it was his tribe or he was showing any favoritism, but because of the fact that the rule of the majority was held by them. And so therefore, have you forgotten that? And it was at that juncture that our history books report that yes, Saad immediately, he immediately recalled that the Prophet had said so, and he said, Sadaqta, Antabul, and he said that you are the rulers, wa nahnul wuzara, and we will be your wazirs, or we will be your confidants, and we will be your courtiers. So he also realized that the Prophet, when he has said al-aimatu min Quraysh, he meant that the majority rule is something which is enjoyed by the Quraysh, and precisely for this reason, the Prophet had nominated the Quraysh, not because, as I said, I'm repeatedly saying this, not because that it was his tribe or he was showing favoritism to his tribe, but because of the fact that as a nation, there was no means of eliciting the majority in those times. We know that tribal elders were there, and there was no concept of any election. And it was basically those tribal elders, wherever they would tilt, and wherever a tribal elder would show his inclination, that would be the area, or that would be the inclination understood to be of the rest of the party or the rest of the tribe as well. So in those times when it was difficult to find the exact opinion of the majority, the Prophet in his lifetime, he said that this is something that is decided, or this is something that you have to know, that as long as the Quraysh hold the majority, they are eligible to become rulers. So it was precisely this that he had said. And in the Saqifa of Bani Saida, we know that when this discussion was going on, Umar, he actually proclaimed the caliphate of Abu Bakr, and he said that I am just proclaiming his caliphate not because it's a nomination, but because he is the only person amongst the majority party. So remember, the Quraysh were the majority party, but within the Quraysh, the person who held the confidence of all Muslims was Abu Bakr. So when Umar actually nominated his name, when he took the name of Abu Bakr, again, this was not a nomination. It was something in which he said that, well, there is a consensus of the Muslims. Today, I'm just presenting his name, and tomorrow it's going to be ratified. So we know that the next day, this ratification took place, and in a vast majority vote, Abu Bakr was the person who was elected. And Umar who actually warned Muslims that, remember that this is not a nomination, and he said that La khilafata illa an mashfiratin min al-Muslimin. So remember, there is no caliphate, there is no political system unless the Muslims are consulted. So as long as I am concerned, I have just taken his name because I know that all Muslims will be gathered around his personality. There would be no difference of opinion, but this should not be quoted as an instance that I'm doing some nomination. All that I'm doing is I'm proposing his name, and I know that he'll be the person accepted. So this is how Abu Bakr's election took place. It was generally held and accepted right after the Prophet had passed away. And then, of course, the Quraysh, as you can clearly see, that their sway was continuing in this rightly guided caliphate. And when Abu Bakr anhu was about to die, he consulted the leaders of the Ansar, he consulted the leaders of the Muhajirun, and he actually said that, well, I do opine, my opinion is that Umar should succeed me, but I will not go against the opinion of the majority. So he held wide discussions with all the leaders. He called them up one by one, and he told them that, look, this is the person who is best suited for this job. There were some people who actually complained, and they said that Umar is very harsh, he's very strict, he's a hard taskmaster. But there are people who said, well, this is something which it might be the case, but then as far as his competence is concerned, there's absolutely no two opinions about him. So after this wider consultation, Abu Bakr actually said that, well, Umar is the person who, after me, would be ruling, because as the party who still enjoys the majority, it is in the Quraysh. So it was like within the party re-election, or within the party a renomination of a person after he would have passed away. So this nomination, as I said, again, was not something that was done on the basis of some favoritism or because he thought that this is how things would do, but it was done on the basis of consultation. So the same principle of consultation was followed, and the majority party, which was still the Quraysh, it was like replacing the leader of the majority party. So when Abu Bakr was passing away, he gave these reins to Umar. Once he consulted all the major leaders, and all of them were of the opinion that his opinion regarding Umar is something that they ratified. Now, once Umar was wounded, as we all know that he was wounded when he was praying in the mosque, and he knew that he would not survive. So he knew that he could not say that one particular person after him was the person on whom all Muslims would gather. So he thought that there were six people, and all these six people, either one of these six people was eligible enough, was fit enough to rule Muslims, but who of these six would be the ruler is something for which he actually called a committee. He said that you are the six people who I think are people in whom these are Muslims trust, and these six were Ali radiallahu anhu, Usman radiallahu anhu, Talha, Zubair, and Abdul Rahman bin Auf. So these were the six people. And he said, okay, you go and you discussed among yourselves because any one of you is acceptable. And he actually gave them 3 days. And he actually asked Abu Talha Ansari, one of the stalwarts of the Ansar, who had no stake in the claim for caliphate because they were the minority party. So the Quraysh still, once Umar had been fatally wounded and he thought that he would not survive, he asked these six people to decide amongst themselves that who among you would be the next person. So Abdul Rahman bin Auf came up with this ingenious suggestion, I would say, and he said that let's one of us should withdraw in favor of the other people. And so this withdrawal, as a result of this withdrawal, from six people, just three remained. So Ali radiallahu anhu, Usman radiallahu anhu, and Abdul Rahman himself, these were the three people who remained. And next, Abdul Rahman bin Auf said, well, if you give me the right to pick among the two of you, I will surrender, I will withdraw, and I'll nominate which of the two is the person that is fit to rule the Muslims. So the suggestion first was that six people, amongst those six people, one each should withdraw in favor of the other. So that from those six, we had three. And when the three of them were Ali, Usman, and Abdul Rahman bin Auf. So Abdul Rahman bin Auf said that I withdraw, but on the condition that you give me that which of the two remaining ones should be the ones. I mean, one of these two would be the ruler, but I'll be nominating that particular person. So when everyone agreed, so Abdul Rahman bin Auf actually gave his decision in favor of Usman radiallahu anhu. So once again, this democratic principle was followed within the party. The Quraysh were still the ruling majority party, so Abu Bakr, Umar, and then Usman. And once Usman had been brutally murdered and killed, we know, again, the election of Ali radiallahu anhu took place on the same principle. However, there is a debate whether the electoral college was the right college or not, because the Muslim empire had expanded by that time to Syria, into all part and the rest of the world. I mean, a large part of the rest of the world. And it was not just in Medina that people should have relied on the opinion of those who were living in Medina. So there is this debate whether the electoral college, as so to speak, or the people who should give opinion, were sufficiently given that option or not. Because in fact, people who lived in Syria, for example, Amir Muawiyah was the governor of Syria in those times. He actually disagreed with this, and he had his own plea that these people who have been nominated are amongst the ruling are the ones who have stained their cells with the blood of Usman, and therefore he would not accept them. So the debate that ensued was not on the principle, but on a detail that whether the opinion of all the Muslims or all the contesting parties had taken place or not. But the principle was still the same, that the ruling party was the one which was eligible to rule. But once Amir Muawiyah assumed the reins of caliphate, we know that it was from his times that this shura, or this democracy, which had prevailed in the first 30 years, in which the Quranic directive of Amruhum Shura Bainahum was followed in letter and spirit, we find that once he nominated his son Yazid bin Muawiyah to be the next ruler, that this principle was historically violated, and therefore, right after them, this dynasty or this dynastic politics they ensued, and for the rest of 14 centuries, we saw a continuation of this whole process. But the fact is that in the rightly guided caliphate, exactly as the Quran had said, Amruhum Shura Bainahum, that their system has to be based on consultation, which meant that people who would enjoy the authority or the confidence of the majority would be the ones who should be installed. And as long as they enjoy this majority, they are the ones who would actually be the ones who would be eligible to rule. but once they lose this majority, they will not be eligible to rule. So this also clarifies this huge misconception which people have, that perhaps the Prophet had shown this favoritism when he said that Al-Aimatu min Quraysh, that the rulers shall be from among the Quraysh. And what right had he to say so? Because, I mean, in spite of being the prophet of almost of the Muslims, that if he did so, then is it not similar to Brahmanism, or is it not similar to other dynasties in which you are just nominating your own tribe or people who belong to your own tribe? And this is something which is now written in all Islamic history books which relate to Islamic politics, that the Caliph has to belong to the Quraysh, because they have misunderstood this narrative of the Prophet. They think that the Prophet had given this directive as an eternal directive, that the ruler has to be a Quraysh. He has to belong to the tribe of Quraysh. And we know that this is what all our political books, like Al-Imama wa Siyasa of Ibn Qutayba, one of the earliest books of Islamic politics, and some of the other books, they always say that, well, a ruler has to be from amongst the Quraysh, and if you don't find a Quraysh person or belong to the Quraysh, then it is only as a second option, or under compulsion would be we will elect someone else. Otherwise, the right to rule is something which belongs to the Quraysh. And of course, this brings a lot of questions in mind as well, and also negates the Quranic principle of Amruhum Shura Bainahum, because Islam doesn't say in the Quran that you have to follow what, you have to pick a Quraysh Caliph. All it says is that the Caliph, or the person who rules, has to be a person which is installed on the basis of the majority vote. And therefore, we have to understand this as well, that Aimatu min Quraysh was not an eternal directive. It was something which the Prophet had said in his own times, that in his own times, the authority of the majority is something which is enjoyed by the Quraysh. And he has actually said, "Qaddimu Qurayshan wa la tuqaddimuha," that you bring forth the Quraysh and don't supersede them, because they are the persons on whom the rest of the Arabia, or all the rest of the Arabs, they willfully and they very, very affectionately call them and regard them to be their rulers in this situation. So this particular hadith, or this particular narrative of the Prophet, was just a corollary of Amruhum Shura Bainahum for that part of history in which the Quraysh, as long as they enjoyed the majority, would remain the rulers. So I would conclude my talk here by telling our viewers here that as far as the system of politics which is envisaged by the Quran, it is what we call the Shura, and in modern terms, the Shura is something which can be equated with democracy, and it is the rule of democracy which Islam wants its people to follow. It does not impose any conditions for people who come to power. As far as the people are concerned, they don't need to be scholars, because as far as legislation in Islamic State is concerned, it is something which an Islamic State has to do through its parliament, and the parliament does not need to be a parliament or a place where all persons are scholars. What they do is they would listen to the opinion of scholars, or if they are contesting opinions, there would be standing committees who could argue, and then, of course, the final vote would be on the basis of the arguments which are presented by scholars in front of the parliament. So like scholarly committees which can give an opinion, they will argue in front of the parliament, and the parliamentarians would then be in a position to give one opinion, their own preference. So for this, as I said, it's not essential that the scholars themselves be the people who constitute a parliament. And so therefore, even people who are elected as representatives, they suffice for this job. Of course, they could be improved, their lot can be improved, but the restriction that they have to be scholars is something which the Quran has not imposed. And we are, of course, after the Quran, not in a position to amend the Quran in any way by adding a condition. So concluding my talk, I would say that the Quran tells us Amruhum Shura Bainahum, which means that the system of government has to be based on opinion, it has to be based on consultation, and this actually automatically tells us that as long as this consultation is done through adult franchise, through the means that we have, whether they are parliamentary, whether they are presidential, it is fine. I mean, this is a debate that can go on between people, but in this regard, as far as taking the opinion of people is concerned, if that is honored, then it is our own discretion whether we follow the parliamentary system of democracy or the presidential of democracy. So I am now available for any questions that you might have, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, my dear teacher. Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen, and our dear friends. So it was a great discussion, a beautiful topic again. I would like to remind our audience that we are going to do a concise and precise questioning with as much less of discussion as possible, so everybody gets around. We'll start off with the first question from Mr. Tariq Javed. Please go ahead, sir.
I have a bit of a sensitive question. While we agree that the Quranic principle is like universal about Amruhum Shura Bainahum, and it is like for all the times true, and then we also believe that the election of all the four Rashidun caliphs were according to this principle. Then I have a question that the problem started during the caliphate of Hazrat Usman. As we know, there was quite a widespread revolt against the policies of Osman. So there was no system. I mean, there was a system of election of the caliph, but there was no system to for the caliph to step down. I mean, I just wish if Usman could have stepped down, maybe our history would have been different. Does it mean from the Quran's principle that the election will be with the consultation of the people, and removal of the caliph should also be with the consultation of the people?
Yes, that is correct. That is what this verse actually tells us. But you see, the basic thing which happened in the time of Usman was that the expansion of the caliphate had taken place. And the opinions of the Syrians and people who belonged to the other parts of the empire was not elicited. And it was only in Medina, when Osman was murdered, that Ali had been given these reins. So, as I referred to in my talk, that the electoral college, so to speak in modern terms, so electoral college means people who elect a representative. It was not rightly adjudicated. So the electoral college in the times of the election of Ali was confined to Medina. So only people in Medina, they actually picked him. Whereas it should have been on a wider consultation, because the electoral college, as I said, or the people who should elect a caliphate had spread. And it was not just in Medina where the caliph was that the election was needed. Opinion of the Syrians, opinion of other people or other parts of the empire to which the empire had spread also needed to be elicited. And this was not done for various reasons, which is not my topic at the moment, because what we are actually trying to discuss here is that the Quranic mode, what exactly is that mode? And being a mode which is to be followed by people, so yes, people do make mistakes as well. And as I said, this mistake perhaps was because of the fact that the expansion of the Islamic State had not been taken into account, and the opinions of people who lived outside of Medina, it was not elicited. And this actually resulted in a huge tragedy later on, and a lot of lives were lost, a lot of battles took place, and it started off with Amir Muawiyah nominating his own son. And it was from here on, I mean, from there on, you can say, for the next 14 centuries, that the pace was set that people would belong to the dynasty or the monarchy in which they were born in.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Rafia. Please go ahead.
Dr. Shehzad, a lot of Shia say, in fact, all the Shia say that Prophet Muhammad had clearly nominated Hazrat Ali as his successor, and he had announced it. Now, I would like your opinion on this, because when you try to talk to some Shias, they said it is very clear, it is there written that Prophet Muhammad had said this. So then during Hazrat Usman's and these reigns, Hazrat Ali was not considered. So could you shed some light on this, please?
Well, I think that I'm going to, be a little blunt in this and maybe a little straightforward. I can say this with my faith intact and with all my senses, that as far as the election of a caliphate was concerned, even the Prophet had not been given this right to nominate anyone. The Prophet was not given this right, and he neither did exercise this right. In the first place, it was the Quran which said that Amruhum Shura Bainahum, which means that the authority of the majority would prevail. So the Quran had left it open-ended, and it had told people that, well, it is the Shura that has to be followed. So it never gave the authority to the Prophet, and neither did the Prophet ever exercise this authority, that which I can say as an extended comment as well. So if someone claims that the Prophet did make this, he did nominate someone, then we have to tell that person that this is something which the Quran never actually gave him the authority. Well, my opinion is that he didn't nominate anyone. But if the Shias contest this, then they have to be told that if this was something that they hold still good or right, then they have to understand that on the Quran had categorically said that a person who holds the conference of the majority is the person, or is the group of people who should enjoy the status of being the rulers, and no single person has this nomination from anywhere. Even the Prophet was not authorized to nominate anyone.
Thank you so much, Rabia. We have a question from YouTube, and they say, isn't it true that Ali and Zubair radiallahu ta'ala anha didn't agree with Abu Bakr being the caliphate?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, Ali did. It does say that Ali radiallahu anhu. I mean, Zubair, yes, he was a person who did not accept him as a caliph, but Ali, about him, we know that he did. Initially he did not accept this, but later on we know that he did accept Abu Bakr as the caliph, and he actually pledged his allegiance to him. Initially he was a little hesitant, but then he did pledge his allegiance. But yes, Zubair was someone who did not do so all his life. But as you can see, that this doesn't matter. If a few people don't agree, they just have one vote. I mean, it doesn't matter if 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 people do so. It's the will of the majority that has to prevail, and this is precisely what actually happened. And the Prophet, when he said Al-Aimatu min Quraysh, he was actually referring to this fact that the rulers should belong to the Quraysh, and of course Ali radhiyallahu anhu was from the Quraysh as well. But then, as I said, that as history has passed on the events of this election right after the Prophet, it clearly tells us that it was done through people being asked about the person who should become the ruler after the Prophet. And Umar who actually nominated his name, not because it was a nomination, because he thought that he is the person who would be held in regard by every person. And that is precisely what happened, because in the Saqifa, where people had gathered to do so, to elect the next person, there was a debate, and that debate actually had become a little. I mean, it had crossed certain limits as well. So, in order to circumvent this, Umar proposed his name, and then the next day there was a general pledging of allegiance that took place, and almost a very vast majority, except a few individuals, which, as a matter of fact, would become inconsequential, whoever they are, and as long as they are not in majority, because, as I said, in this case, the principle of Amruhum Shura Bainahum would entail that the will of the majority would be imposed.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Dr. Sohail Anwar. Dr. Sohail, please go ahead.
Dr. Saleem, Boss Shukriya, you have categorically explained the concept of Amruhum Shura Bainahum in a very clear fashion. I was just going to ask about the applicability of this principle, because any philosophical or ideological or religious rationale is always critiqued or judged in the applicability of the basic theoretical dictum. But two of the previous listeners have already pointed out the dispute between the Shia and the Sunni narratives, starting right after the death of the Prophet regarding the heirship of what actually happened. So I'm not going to repeat that question. But we see that the breakdown of the principle right from the time of Hazrat Usman, from the time of his death, and Hazrat Ali taking over, we see the breakdown, and it just carried on after that, so much so that right from the Umayyads down to the Ottomans, which were our last Khalifa, so to say, quote unquote, we do not see any application of Amruhum Shura Bainahum except for the slave dynasty of the India, where there was actually, during that time, I think it lasted for about 250 years, the slave dynasty, where there was no concept of dynastical rule or heirship. They used to be elected, maybe because they were slaves, But other than that, everywhere else in the Muslim empires, there's no application. It's always son of the son of the son of the son. We see murders, we see conspiracies, we see sons killing fathers and father killing sons for heirship. It just completely broke down. So I know you might not have a clear answer to this, but what happened to the applicability when it comes to us of this rule?
Okay, I think that I do think that there is a explanation for this, and that is that there is another verse in the Quran which is mentioned in Surah Al Imran, and which actually supports dictatorial rule, so to speak, or the right to veto. And that particular verse is addressed to the Prophet, and it says that "Farfu anhum wastaghfir lahum washawirhum fil amr." So this is a verse which says that you forgive people who come around you. It addresses the Prophet. "Farfu anhum wastaghfir lahum," seek forgiveness for them. "Washawirhum fil amr," and consult them whenever you need to make a decision. And then the verse goes on to says "Fa'iza azamta fatawakkal Allah." But once you have reached a decision after consulting them, then you just trust God and do whatever is right for you. So this is a verse which addresses the Prophet himself, and it has a particular background. I'm not going into details. You can look up the background. It was in the background or the backdrop of the Battle of Uhud that this was happening. But people severed this verse, subtracted it from its context, and said, well, look, this verse says that a person of the caliber of the Prophet, he's being addressed and he's being said that you should consult people, which means shawirhum fil amr, but then do whatever you think is best. So this is the verse which is generally highlighted, and the verse "Amruhum Shura Bainahum" actually was subsumed under this verse for most parts of our Muslim empire, and people thought that, look, the verse of Surah Al Imran is clearly telling us that as far as the will of the majority is concerned, it's not talking about the will of majority. All it is saying is that you consult people. You may be consulting the majority, you consult all sorts of people, but you take this decision yourself. So this is the verse that became more prominent in our history, and because this verse was addressed to the Prophet himself, so people thought, well, what better model than what the Prophet has been told himself, that you should consult people but decide for your own self. But when you look up this verse in its context, you'll realize that one thing is that it is a prerogative of the Prophet which is being discussed. The Prophet being guided from God, of course, he didn't need that consultation or a wider opinion making. It was said that, well, as far as these people are concerned, these hypocrites, you'll find out that the context is of hypocrites, and the Prophet is being told that the Almighty is telling him that I'm not going to expose these hypocrites because they are doing all sorts of conspiracies, but at the moment I still feel that there are people who might change from among them, so I'm going to give them more respite. That's what the Almighty had in the background, and therefore he told the Prophet, "Farfu anhum," just forgive them for the while, wastaghfir lahum, and seek forgiveness for them, and include them in their consultation, in your consultation. Washawirhum fil amr. So the context is not about a general consultation taking place amongst Muslims. It specifically relates to the hypocrites who had spread that propaganda, who had spread that malicious conspiracy in the Battle of Uhud also. And it was in that backdrop that this particular verse was being addressed. But once you cut off a verse from its context and you give this ring to it that it tells you that you can consult people but do whatever you like. So this is the verse that became so prominent, and that people thought that the Amruhum Shura Bainahum verse is something that has to be interpreted beneath this by holding this superior. And this is how, once this pattern started, I mean, it was like a house of cards, and people started following that. And as a result, as you just mentioned, that Amruhum Shura Bainahum is a verse that was pushed in the background, and it was never given that importance that it held. And it was only in the last century, when the caliphate was dismembered, that some of the scholars pointed out that, well, we are missing this verse. And you'll be surprised to know that the 2 or 3 major books which you'll find Muslim history being written about Islamic politics, they don't even mention this verse anywhere, because they think that it is not something which is an obligation. All that a caliph needs to do is consult people. He can consult his courtiers, but the final decision is something that he can take himself. So this is a case of understanding of a particular verse which actually prevailed amongst Muslims.
Well, thank you for that in-depth explanation. To be very honest, that's not a big surprise. We see that in all aspects of our life. Pick up from Quran, whatever suits you, and apply it to your life. Who would want to give up power? Power corrupts. Once the Umayyad moved into their big mansion and castles, why would they want to give it up? They would just want to keep their children and their children and their children. Nobody would want to become a commoner, and we know that they fabricated so many hadiths just to suit their power and emperorship. So this is not a big surprise that picked it up. But unfortunately, that's the way it was. Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Riaz. Please go ahead, sir.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr.
Walaikum salam.
Dr. The word, shura comes along with the salah and rizq. So if we see the ayah when it's taken in its context,
right.
It clearly states that the shura should consist of the people who, establish the salah and they spend from the rizq, which is given to them. So, we are not talking about those two, the properties which the shura should have it. These are the qualities which the shura members should have it.
Actually, this is what it is telling us is that Allazina istajabu li rabbihim wa aqamus salata wa amruhum shura bainahum. This is the whole verse. That they are the people who respond to the call of God. They are the people who adhere to the prayer, and they are the people who base their system on consultation. So it is like this. It's not that the prayer is made a condition. That is made elsewhere. And elsewhere in the Quran, we find that the rights of Muslim citizenship is that they have to be people who pray and pay the zakat. So two positive commandments which make a person eligible for all the rights which Muslims have are that they have to adhere to the prayer and they are the ones who should pay zakat. So that is the condition of citizenship which is mentioned elsewhere. Here what is mentioned is that as far as their system is concerned, it is based on shura, and it's not qualified by the fact that they are the people who should pray, because as you can see that the previous two clauses, the words are wallazina istajabu li rabbihim. That is the first expression, which means that they respond to the call of God. Istajabu li rabbihim wa aqamus salah, and they are the ones who are diligent in their prayer. So it's all referring back to the Muslims, and they are the ones who base their system on consultation. So these are three independent attributes of Muslims which are being mentioned in that verse of Surah Shura, and they are not mentioned as conditions one for the other. So all three are independent, and all three are actually qualifying the fact that they are the ones who uphold these three things.
Thank you very much. We only have time, like 2 minutes left, and we'll take a question. Mr. Zahid, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for taking my call. Very briefly, actually, shura, when we say shura, I don't think so it means one man, one vote. It just means that a selected body of people who are more qualified, who have been gifted with higher wisdom, and who are more pious amongst the Muslims. They should have the right to decide. So you have to have a group of this, the elite amongst the people, not in terms of their financial strength, but in terms of their moral strength. That is how these systems, they are followed even today in jirga systems in tribal areas. So this shura, consensus, and this one man, one vote, I don't think so the Prophet ﷺ, or even in the rightly guided, they ever followed, or they asked the audience to raise their hand and they counted hands for a decision to be made. It was only made, the analogy that the Quraysh should lead, it actually defies that concept of shura, because how can you decide, what if the Quraysh decided to choose somebody from amongst Ansar? So that, so the Prophet probably would not have given a predetermined decision that since Quraysh are a majority, so they have the right over the Ansar. In that context, let's say even in the present democracy, let's say Punjab has majority in the 4 provinces of Pakistan. So by that right, they should always have the right to rule. That's not, I don't think so that what he meant was.
we're running out of time. I think we understood the question, and we'll let our teacher respond.
Thank you so much. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Zahid.
So you see, I mean, yes, your question needs a little detailed answer, but the first thing that I'd like to respond to in this regard is the words are amruhum shura bainahum. It does not say baina al-muslihin or baina ulama al-muslimin, or, I mean, as you said, the elite people or the people who are qualified or people who are well educated, because the Quran could have easily pointed this out, that people, I mean, there has to be some aristocracy or some sort of a standard. It said it has to be amongst them, and whoever they are, whatever they are, they could, I mean, they could have street wisdom, they could have no wisdom, but the Quran actually, in my humble opinion, and I can be wrong, imposes or reposes this in the form of an opinion which can be given by every person. And as far as the counting is concerned, you might be well informed in this regard. But in the battle of Hunain, when the Hawazin were actually made prisoners, the Prophet himself actually called out people, and he said, "Khamsatum min Hawazin wa khamsatum min al-Auf." So he called out the leaders, 5 of them, and said that you come and give your opinion. You see, in those times, because of a tribal system, it was not possible to go for a complete franchise. So the leaders of a tribe were given the same status, keeping in view the tribal system and the feudal system of those times. So as I just pointed out earlier on, that what happens is that the principle of shura'iyat or consultation is given by the Quran, but how that consultation would take place is still something which would vary from place to place. In the earliest societies, it was through the tribal elders. And as those tribal elders delegated their authority to their own people, as we can see today, and as urbanization has kicked in, now each person has been delegated that authority. So you see, that has evolved, the system has evolved. The principle has been the same, that it is basically the will of the majority or the will of the people that has to prevail. So that is what I have understood.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. This was a brilliant discussion. We have run out of time, and thank you everybody for coming and joining us and asking questions. Have a great day. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much.